And we're back for episode 18 of the Kevin Rooke Show, which means today I'll be giving away 1,800 sats to a listener who sends in a comment over the Lightning Network. I'll have more on that later in the show. But first up, today's guest is Keagan McClelland. He's the co-founder at Start9. Start9 is building personal servers. And in our conversation, we talked a lot about what the difference is between a Bitcoin node, a Lightning node, a personal server, some of the additional features and apps that are involved, and what you can do with a personal server. We also talked about the chicken and egg problem of attracting developers and attracting users to this self-sovereign computing ecosystem, right? You need developers to build out applications that can then be used by personal servers. You need users in order to send information back and forth between themselves through their personal servers. We also talked about the growth of the Lightning Network overall and some of the applications that Keagan is excited about. This is a great conversation. I highly recommend you go through it. Go through it twice. It's that good. Keagan really understands this space, and I think it's evolving at a really quick pace. And so it's worth taking the time to go through this one slowly. Just before we get into the episode, today's show is sponsored by Voltage. Voltage is the premier provider of Bitcoin and Lightning node infrastructure. We'll have more on them later in the show in the Lightning Round. Keagan, thanks for coming on the show today. How you doing?
Good. Thanks, Kevin, for having me. Just working to get more software out to help people be more free.
Tell me a little bit about Start9. And for those who aren't familiar, maybe explain first what it is, how it works, and why you decided to build it.
I think I'm actually going to try to answer those questions in reverse.
Sure.
Because that actually will mirror the journey that we went on to create the thing in the first place. So we were in the middle of summer of 2019, and we were trying to figure out, me and my founding team had just left our previous job that we were all kind of in the crypto sphere. Part of the reason that we left is because, we were looking to try to do things more on the side of like increasing people's freedom and self-sovereignty, specifically through Bitcoin. And we were starting to get a little bit fed up with how much time we had to spend supporting alternative coins and stuff like that. And that the management of the company that we had worked for was not particularly interested in, trying to make it such that people could hold their own keys and whatnot. So this is kind of right around the time that Lightning started to be viable to run, but long before it was ever popular to run. And so I took a few days to set up a Lightning node on a virtual private server, similar to like AWS. Mine happened to be on DigitalOcean. And, I have a degree in computer science, and I'd been a developer for, a handful of years, and it took me about 3 days, all said and done, to get things set up. And, but once I got set up, one of my co-founders, Matt, who's now the CEO of Start9, had started his process of getting his Lightning node up and running. And so I went over to his house to go help him do it. And, he's also a developer. But, kind of midway through this process, he was just like, if this is what people have to do to set up Lightning nodes, no one's ever going to do it. And if no one ever does it, then Bitcoin's like, it's not going to go anywhere. So his premise was just like, this cannot be the state of affairs for people to get onboarded onto Lightning. So let's fix it. So we had really set out to the point where we wanted to, really also what had happened is that this was right around when Casa decided they were going to discontinue their node product. And so we basically decided to pick up where they left off and make something that people could very easily get a Bitcoin and a Lightning node up and running quickly. It wasn't too long into the design process that we then realized that all of the tools that we had to be, or that we were designing and creating to make it easy to get Lightning up and running could be generalized thereafter to all manner of server software. And so, whether you wanted to run your own chat applications or, Bitcoin node, maybe you wanted to run like an altcoin node or something like that. I mean, one of the main criticisms against altcoins is that they're centralized and that no one's running nodes. So ostensibly, as much as I am Bitcoin first and really Bitcoin only in terms of my efforts, like this is good for everyone to be able to run their own software, not depend on the goodwill and integrity of third parties that they may or may not know personally in order to be able to operate on the internet with the properties they might want and expect, such as privacy, censorship resistance, and general availability and ownership, right? So all of that kind of contributed to the conception of the idea that is the embassy, which is just a plug-and-play personal server. It is non-opinionated on what is or is not being run on it. So unlike some of the other node products that you might see in the Bitcoin ecosystem, when you get the embassy, it comes with nothing. It comes with Embassy OS installed, but it doesn't come with any applications installed. So if you want to run Bitcoin, you install Bitcoin. It doesn't just come with it. Same with Lightning. And, as of right now, we have a couple of different Lightning implementations. So you actually have some choice in what you're doing, even on Lightning. So that is kind of what the embassy is. How it works is a little bit more complicated of a discussion, and maybe I might actually kick it back to you about like what you're mostly interested in the how it works, because there's a lot of different levels we can get to. And I'm sure that your listeners might prefer a particular band of them.
Sure. Well, first, I think I'd love to tackle the shift that I've seen in the discussion around Lightning nodes over the last few years. To me, it seemed like a few years ago, the discussion around a Lightning node or a Bitcoin node was you want to run a node for Bitcoin, you want to verify the blockchain, right? You want to support the decentralization of the network. Now it seems like the discussion and the conversation is shifting a bit towards, hey, there's also all these other cool things that you can implement in a node. You can create this like personal server that helps people take control of their own data, and along with their money, right? How did that shift happen?
Well, so it's really that shift becomes apparent when you start to think of your of your Lightning node instead of your Bitcoin node. Your Bitcoin node is what if you're trying to run your own. There's two reasons mainly that people do it, and it's actually unfortunately most people aren't yet still doing it for the quote unquote right reason, which is that you should be verifying all of your incoming transactions against your node, meaning if your node doesn't say you have been paid, then you haven't been paid. And so that just and the reason that you might do that is that your node is enforcing all of the consensus rules. You installed it. You're not trusting a third party to like say, oh, hey, you've been paid, when the reality of consensus is that you have not. And so it's in part like a defense against a violation of the 21 million cap, because even if Bitcoin, the core base protocol, is immune to the double spend problem, if a third party tells you you've been paid and you release goods and services on the other side of that trade, and it turns out that you actually haven't, then you have in effect been double spent. And the fact that the Bitcoin core protocol defends against this is somewhat irrelevant. The second reason that people run Bitcoin nodes is just idea that's kind of more born out of the remnants of the scaling debate that ended in 2017 with the UASF, which is that nodes have a defense against, malicious upgrades to the protocol. And that is a very complicated discussion, and in that claim is neither completely true nor completely false either. And there's still a lot of debate surrounding how much influence or defense that actually provides. But at the very least, the dead obvious reason to run a node is to verify the transactions against it. But largely, you can conduct your business on the Bitcoin network without doing that. You can still have that trust. In at least 2019, and to a large degree even still today, nodes are an even more strict requirement for Lightning. You cannot even transact on the Lightning network without having a node. Since then, you might see certain wallets that are like custodial for Lightning, like Wallet of Satoshi, that don't have this property, but that's, you know, neither here nor there, because you kind of had that back in the Bitcoin world too. The point is that if you want sovereign control over your funds in Lightning, not only do you need to have keys that you might put in a hardware wallet and store offline, you actually need to have a system that that those keys are loaded into, so that you can actually transact on the Lightning network. So now you need this thing that is running all the time. And the reason for that is that you can't receive funds unless it's on and unless it's addressable, and you can't even actually send funds unless it's on and addressable. Because, you know, let's say you have an app on your phone, it's still connected into your node because that's where all the keys are. So in order to be able to send money, you have to be able to contact it. And then the last reason that a lot of people like to dabble with running Lightning nodes is because they want to provide liquidity to the network and essentially earn a yield of sorts. They want to be able to put their Bitcoin to work. And the most trustless way to do that is still very Bitcoiny, so to speak, is to run a Lightning node and offer routing. In all cases, your node needs to be online, not 100% of the time, but basically 100% of the time. So no product resembling a hardware wallet will do. And in fact, many people don't have desktops these days. They mostly just have laptops. So if you shut your laptop and you take it, you know, across town to go to a coffee shop, it's off for that entire duration. And if it's off for that entire duration, if someone tries to pay you, you won't be able to receive the funds. Generally speaking, you probably won't be trying to send funds during that trip, so maybe that's not so big of a deal, but you also can't route any either. So we realized then also that, okay, it needs to be on and addressable all the time. And also if you wanted to like have other decentralized tech that relied on message passing, such as like the most obvious answer is like an instant messenger. Like if you are, when someone tries to send you an instant message, what they're really doing in most cases today is say, let's pick on Facebook for a second. They're sending the message from their phone, laptop, whatever, to Facebook's server, and where it will live until you, the receiver, contact the internet, contact Facebook servers, and download all the messages that you have pending for yourself. If you want to cut Facebook out of that process, somebody still needs to run that server, because otherwise there's nowhere to send the message. So why not you? And it's kind of the conjunction of those two use cases that we just realized that there's a bunch of stuff that can benefit from people running their own servers. And while there's been a tremendous amount of work done in the user experience development for things like phones or laptops, the same care has not been given to the user experience for server products, largely because running servers was the domain of experts. And we didn't really see a reason to do it differently until, you know, recently, that we're now seeing the types of abuse that can happen when these companies can deplatform people that they don't like, or privacy leaks, or even if the company itself is doing everything right, or in terms of like their intent, breaches of data that might leak all of your information. The last interesting piece of all of this from a security perspective is that it changes the game theory of, or like the economic incentives to hack various organizations. If everyone is running their own server and it's about equally hard to hack into each of them, then what user's individual data is worth the cost of that hack? I don't know if there's a person on Earth where, I mean, there might be a handful where that would be worth it. But a lot of the reasons that people hack these large organizations today is because everyone's data is in one place. You only have to hit it once and you get all of this information, as opposed to having to hit a bunch of individual targets to get it, which completely changes the economics of hacking into people's computers.
This is really illuminating. I appreciate this walkthrough. I think this is really helpful. For listeners who maybe aren't familiar with using or with like sovereign computing and self-hosting, what are some of the interesting things that you can do today if you have a Start9 or if you're on Start9?
Yeah, so the flagship product is actually called the Embassy, but it's our only product, so most people will know what you're talking about if you talk about Start9.
So the Embassy is a physical device?
Yes,
okay.
The Start9 is the company name. That's us, the creators. It's more the Start9. The name is more of a statement of philosophy than it is a description of what we do, and we can talk about that later. But the Embassy itself, what you can do with it today, obviously, you can run Bitcoin, you can run Lightning. Beyond that, we created a proof of concept called Cups Messenger, which is it's an instant messaging system that relies totally on Tor. So you basically fire up a .onion address, or like you don't have to do this. The app, when you install it, it basically generates one for you, and that's your identity. And so it ends up being the fastest way to be able to communicate point to point between any two people on Earth in total privacy, not only such that people can't eavesdrop on the communications, but so much so that because of Tor, they don't even know who's talking to whom. So I don't know if you remember the Edward Snowden leaks back in the day and the debate around metadata and whether or not that was considered spying on people. This sort of a construction that we have with Cups is such that you don't even have the data. No party could possibly tell who is talking to whom. Now, that hasn't received as much maintenance because it has largely been displaced by what is emerging as an industry standard called the Matrix protocol. And this is probably like the second biggest reason that you would want to run an embassy, is that you can... The Matrix is like a series, it's literally a matrix in a like grid sense of servers that all synchronize data between each other but with the sole purpose of both point-to-point chat as well as chat rooms. So if you're on Matrix, you can install the application, generate yourself an account on your own server. You can join different chat rooms on other people's servers. You can start up your own chat room that other people can join to your servers. And the point is that as long as the room host is still around, you'll still be able to talk to people. And so you can't really be deplatformed in any real sense. You can get kicked out of someone's proverbial living room, right? But you can't be barred from speaking in the same way that you might be from Twitter or from Facebook.
Does Matrix use the Lightning Network in the same way that something like Sphinx does?
Matrix doesn't use the Lightning Network at all, actually, right now. And so for everyone, this like Sphinx uses the Lightning Network as a means of transporting messages, whereas Matrix itself is just a message passing protocol and a means of synchronization across many different individual nodes, such that no node is really a central authority per se. There have been working groups to integrate Lightning into the Matrix protocol. Actually, I don't know if it's the protocol or just the end user client so that they can pay each other. But that is, I haven't seen a lot of buzz on that in recent months.
Interesting. So it seems like messaging is kind of that first application beyond payments, right?
Yes. And in some sense, it's actually the original one, because Lightning requires a message passing system in order to even work to begin with, which is why implementing a chat app on top of Lightning is not... I mean, I think time and the industry will play out how, I may be proven wrong by this, but I am not particularly optimistic that something like Sphinx, or I think they have a competitor now as well, is something that will end up, in its current form anyway, dominating the way that we interact with one another. Simply because, you already have a messaging protocol beneath Lightning in order to make Lightning work, so you might as well just use that to do the transmission of messages.
What do you think are some of the interesting applications people will be using their nodes for in the future? Like, what is maybe not built yet, but something you're excited about?
I'm excited for social media in general. I'd like to see a world where, rather than me posting my thoughts to Twitter, I could post it directly to my server, and then as long as there was even a single person who wanted to listen to what I had to say, they would be able to get to it. There are many problems with, like, social media solves a whole bunch of things. First of all, it's just the transport of the messages themselves, but it also performs a role of discovery and curation, prioritization. And in some ways, these are some of the things that we're starting to distrust these companies with, right? Like, how much influence do they have over our thought patterns if they get to pick the priority order of what we see? So, but it is also a double-edged sword because, like, at the same time, if you're flooded with everything that everyone sends you, right? Like, have you ever tried to check your email spam box? Like, it's a disaster. So, those remain unsolved problems, I think. But I think that, there will be interesting ways that people go and approach those problems once we have a decentralized base. And sort of to that end, one of the apps that is available on the embassy today is Mastodon. So there's been a handful of Twitter scares, at least in the Bitcoin community, in the last, year or so, where people were just like, oh my God, a whole bunch of people are being deplatformed. We need to get off of Twitter and find something that else. And the wrong answer is to go to a competitor that is still a central organization that has all the same power. And the right answer is to try to do self-hosting. So a lot of people have fled to like bitcoinhackers.org, which is nice in some sense because it's not Twitter, but bitcoinhackers.org is a single Mastodon server. What you really want is your own Mastodon server. And so we do offer that on the embassy right now.
Interesting.
In addition to that, we have something called File Browser, which is basically a Google Drive replacement. That is a single user application. If none of your friends are running embassies, none of your friends are running any of these other applications, you can still get value out of a system like that because you can upload files to it, and then wherever you are in the world, you can just log in and download them. You can even provide share links and stuff like that. And then finally, the last, I think, thing that will help cover the bases of what it can do is we have Vault Warden, which is an open source implementation of Bitwarden, which is a password manager. So right now, you probably have a bunch of passwords to a bunch of different apps or whatever. Maybe you've saved those to a password manager. Maybe you haven't. But if you are using a password manager that is hosted somewhere, something like LastPass, in essence, you're trusting LastPass, both their competence and their integrity, to be able to store those things in such a way that nobody else will be able to get at them. And all that we've done by putting Vault Warden onto the embassy is we're just guaranteeing that your passwords only exist on your server.
Interesting. Okay, so passwords, social media, file storage seem to be some of the main kind of emerging use cases for running a node. Do you think the form factor of a node in its current state, it's typically like a little black box or like a little thing you stick beside your modem or your internet router, is that going to change at all? Do you see that becoming like can that be integrated into a modem to the point where you can have just one box that does it all? Because people typically just tie the two together and have them both kind of sitting there. Does that?
I think 10 years from now, if our thesis on what the world needs and how viable it is goes according to what we think, and everyone is running one of these things, I would be rather surprised if it didn't replace your home router in some way.
Could it be?
And there's a few different
phone?
reasons for that. Like, number one, obviously people like it when a device can replace another device in their home rather than to have one extra thing. But there's actually technical reasons for it as well, which is that in order to make all of this work, we have to do an enormous amount of like network management. And so if rather than trying to negotiate those parameters with the router in your home automatically, if these things just are the router, then a lot of things get easier because it's actually not only managing the services that are running on this thing, but also their interface to the outside world.
So is that the main device that you think, is that the right comparison? That one day we could have Node kind of replacing a router or kind of integrating with a router? Or are there other devices as well that could see that same thing happen?
That is, I think, one of the things that at least seems the most likely is the router one. But, we also have plans maybe in the more immediate horizon, which is to really beef these things up. Right now, our prototype, sorry, not prototype, like the product all from inception until today is running off of the Raspberry Pi hardware platform, which is rather small. And it's actually pretty amazing how much you can do with just a Raspberry Pi. But it's also a very weak computer, all things considered. And so, as people start to want to do more and more with these sorts of products, I imagine that we're going to have to beef them up quite substantially for people to get all of the use that they want out of them. And I don't know if having something that's like a real powerhouse is something that you would want to have in a router, right? So you might see some sort of bifurcation of products of like maybe a more lightweight one that has a built-in router, or maybe like a heavyweight that negotiates with the router instead.
What are some of those elements that you would want in like a heavyweight device? Like, is it more storage? Is it some other constraint?
Storage first, for sure, but also compute and memory, right? The original Raspberry Pi 4 that we built off of only had 4 gigs of RAM, and the laptop that I'm using to record this podcast with you has 64 gigs of RAM, and that might be overkill for most users, depending on what applications they're running. But having more than 8 or more than, I think 16 is going to be where I think a lot of people are going to want to sit at the lower end in the long term, once they're running most of the applications that they want to use off of something like this.
Okay. So I want to see if I have this correct so far. If I'm using an embassy and I've installed a few different apps, let's say I've installed some decentralized social networking app, and that site happens to go down, that front end of the site happens to go down, I can still use the app basically as if nothing has changed, right? Because I'm hosting the app. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, so things get really weird to consider. Like the concept of what takes an app down in a decentralized world is very weird, because we're used to Twitter is down or Twitter is not down. And generally speaking, it's kind of this binary state of it either works or it doesn't. But in a decentralized social media type of thing, you might be able to send messages to some people and not to others because their servers are or are not down, or having issues delivering the packets from you directly to them. So, or you might get these sorts of things where, your Lightning routes are getting a little bit more expensive because the routes that you normally use are down, and so the you're having to route through more expensive routes in order to be able to get your payments to their destinations. And so it's not just as cut and dry as the thing goes down. It's really just like there's a much smoother spectrum from working really well to not working at all. Right. That you'll experience.
Okay, so it could just be like that a portion of the network has gone down, or a particular node has gone down, and that could impact my experience but might not.
Yeah, kind of like where I don't remember if you remember like the Great Minor Migration that happened from like China to I think a largely like Texas and a few other places, but like while that was happening, the hash rate fell off a cliff. Blocks ground. They didn't grind to a halt. They just really slowed down, and Bitcoin didn't go down per se. We just had serious mempool congestion for a while. Right. And so like compared to something like the banking system is that if that much of the central infrastructure for running like Fedwire or something needed to move or had to have maintenance, like you could very well have the entire system be down.
I see. Now, is there any efficiency or speed trade-off if everyone is running or everyone's like hosting some app? Like if everyone's just using this hypothetical decentralized social media network, is that going to make it slower or less efficient in a way than having, Twitter or whoever, Facebook, have everything in one centralized server where they can kind of optimize it? Like what are those trade-offs like?
In almost every case, things will be slower. The hope is that they will be negligibly slower. Time will tell for various applications, and whether or not the fact that they are slower materially affects the end user's overall experience. But you can imagine that if I have to, let's say I have I'm on Mastodon and I want to be able to go and scroll through my feed. In order to do that, I have to go to each individual, like all of the people that I follow, they're on various servers that might be around the world. And my Mastodon node has to go contact each of those, grab all of the messages that have been published and pull them down. And so at the very bare minimum, I'm making a bunch more network calls to a bunch more places as opposed to having one fat one that I make to twitter.com and pull everything down at once. Now, how much slower is that? And notably, are we able to bring resources to the table at the same time? Because if you're able to run more compute in your house, then yes, it might be slower in the sense that you are using more resources. But if you have more resources to spare that you're taking advantage of, maybe it doesn't affect the experience so much. These are all kind of open questions, right? That's the trade-off landscape for sure. And the hope, and so far it definitely seems that this is the case, that the overall architecture of decentralization, with the exception of very, very few highly real-time applications, like you might have a little bit trouble if we wanted to like record something like this in a truly decentralized way. That like in basically most cases, it seems that the slowdown is not all that important.
Right. Okay. So the idea, I guess, is that some of those first emerging applications, like social media in particular, maybe the trade-off is that it may be slightly slower, but net it makes it easier for someone to, it's a better experience maybe because you don't have to deal with censorship, deplatforming, all that stuff. And that kind of outweighs the maybe potential efficiency loss.
Yeah, I would say this. If you're not considering privacy or censorship resistance in your model for evaluating products, then it's very hard to justify this, right? Like in almost every other way, the existing web is going to perform better. It's only when you're like, okay, well, I have a 1 in how many chance that the people who are running this company today don't like what I have to say. And not only that, I might depend on this service for my livelihood, right? If you like, I mean, you're a podcaster, right? If the platforms that try to distribute your content just decide to stop, right, that might materially affect your life. It might, in more so than just like you don't have your entertainment for the day. And like people pay a lot of money for various types of insurance when they're doing business. And so products like the embassy, their real value is kind of in things that behave like insurance, which is that you're not going to notice the value of having this every day, but that day when Facebook goes down, when Twitter goes down, and you're not like all of your, contemporaries can't get anything done and you're still chugging along, you're going to feel really good.
It seems like there's increasing pressure behind some of these applications, Twitter and Facebook, to kind of remove this censorship and to get rid of this idea of like deplatforming people. And it seems to be becoming a more mainstream issue. Do you think right now we have a critical mass of people that really do care about privacy and security and censorship to enable a network to form on the embassy?
That is a great question. I think social media is going to be one of the last applications to really take off.
How come?
Simply because social media, more than any other application, is so critically dependent on network effects, especially things like Twitter, right? I can expect that more private forms of social media, where your interactions are very like point to point, are going to have like those will be a little bit easier to move over to a system like this. But the ones that really depend on like the public comments, that's going to be very, very hard, because everyone wants to be where everyone already is. And if they're not, then they're going to be missing out. And like, you can publish to 3 people, but like really people are publishing, like privacy is not a consideration for things like Twitter, right? DMs aside, right? Like, I don't give a fuck about privacy. I'm publishing on Twitter because I want it to be public. People are like, the whole point is for as many people to see this as possible. And if Twitter employees can see my tweets, then, so be it.
So I think it'll probably be some of those single user applications like storage that could be the first to really pick up steam.
That's the easiest way to start, because it doesn't require any of your friends to have it in order for you to get value out of it. And I don't know if you saw this, but like someone like recently posted this screenshot where Google took down one of their files from Drive because it was like illegal content. And it turned out it was like an empty text file or something stupid like that. But like the point is that the fact that Google even has that power, like what if you depended on that document and they just decided, this, our shareholders don't like that people have this content here, so we're just going to stop you from having it here. Yeah. Then even if you're not taken by surprise by that, some people are going to need a place to store the files that the other people don't want to host, right?
Right. Okay, so I have no sense for how big this is, but how, if I were to like take the average internet user today, they've got a bunch of social media apps, they have a bunch of stuff stored in Google Drive. How much stuff do they have that they have to download? Like, is that something that could even be feasible on a Raspberry Pi today? Do you need much more storage? I don't even know how big it would be.
Yeah, so I've had a Gmail account since 2007. I basically never delete any emails whatsoever. And it's only using about 7 gigabytes. And as with the 030 upgrade with external drives, what we're recommending people is picking up a terabyte of space. So literally every email that I've ever sent or received since 2007 could fit in 0.7% of this drive.
Right.
So a lot of data takes up very little space. If you're a movie, like if you do a lot of videography, maybe you're going to need a lot more storage, because that's super, super data intensive. But otherwise, like most end users are going to be able to get away with relatively low storage. And that's just today. Like I can very easily imagine in the not too distant future having versions of this product that, you just extend the storage up to like 10 terabytes and then it's like not a big deal.
Okay. So let's transition a bit to talk about the business model and competition for Start9. How does this business work? Like what's the primary mechanism you're going to be using to earn money?
Earning money in a decentralized world is very difficult, and that's because property rights are not largely, like in software, if it's truly open source, you can't really exercise any sort of IP rights over the software itself. We've taken kind of a hybrid approach. We think that it's really important that the embassy's operating system is open source for trust reasons. For the simple act of like, yeah, you may physically have the hardware in your home, but if the software that it's running isn't auditable, then it's not materially different than if the servers was, physically in Silicon Valley or DC or wherever. So it's really important that people can audit it. Not that we expect most people to, just because, especially as we have more and more users, the percentage of them that are capable of doing that kind of an audit kind of drops off a cliff. So that said, if you go full open source, then someone can just copy it, and sell a competing product and take all of the investment that you put into the solving those problems for the first time, undercut you, and create problems there. For now, what we're doing is we're selling physical products where the operating system is pre-installed, as well as like all of the materials are in the box. It's got like a nice, instruction pamphlet and whatnot. We also sell the operating system as license, where, or like pre-built, if you don't want to build it from source. And the only stipulation that we really have in the license is that you can't commercialize it. So actually, as of 0.30, it's going to be easy enough to build from source that the operating system itself is going to be effectively free. Obviously, if you want the nice, with a bow on it user experience, we're going to charge for that. But, it doesn't take a lot of effort to go and do it yourself. Finally, we're at Start9, we're pretty stark capitalists. We believe very strongly that people should be paid for the work that they do, but also we think that, largely speaking, you should not get paid unless you're providing value. And so one of the things that has been emerging as a problem created by this new architecture is that there isn't a single point of reliability because there isn't a single point of failure. So your embassy could go down for all manner of reasons, and the same way that your car can break down or that your computer can break down. And that we think that one of the angles here is essentially just providing really, really quality customer support, such that, hey, maybe if you don't want a customer support subscription, then literally the product, once you buy it, it's kind of yours forever, in the sense that you're not paying this ongoing subscription fee that threatens to lock you out of all of your data if you stop paying the fee. But that if it ever does break for whatever reason and you don't know how to fix it on your own, and you are requiring the time of someone who either works at Start9 or maybe they don't work at Start9, but they know how it works well enough to be able to provide that support, then in that case, a fee is appropriate, right?
Mm-hmm. Now, I had a question come in on a previous episode I did. A listener sent in a question about centralization, specifically on something like Umbrel. Is there a centralization risk in your mind to, you and Umbrel kind of operate in a similar kind of self-hosted space, personal server space. Is there a risk to having just a small number of participants there? Or like what kind of dependencies are there on Start9 or Umbrel to provide some of these services? It
is our goal that there is zero operational requirement for Start9, the company, to exist in order for the product to work. In practice, people find bugs, software needs maintenance, so obviously people might depend on Start9 or affiliates to update the software as it needs updating. But unlike something like your, if you have like a G Suite subscription, where if you don't pay the fee, they literally cut you off, and it's essentially not your product. We don't want that to be the case. We want it such that, like, if we sell you this thing and you start to use it, right, that we could fall off the face of the planet, and as long as no sort of external catastrophe happens to your device, that it will just continue to work as is, right? And you can essentially buy it with the same level of relationship that you could go buy a hammer from a store. Like you don't know the hammer manufacturer, you don't know the store, that you're not paying a fee for hammering nails every time you're using one in your home. But the hammer might break, and this is significantly more complicated tech than a hammer, so fixing it might not be within the skills and abilities of the average person. And so I think a car is a better analogy here, right? It's a very complicated piece of machinery. It requires experts to work on it, but it's not like you're paying Toyota or Mazda or Ford some monthly subscription fee to make sure that your car still drives you from point A to point B.
Interesting. What do you think is your specific competitive advantage, I guess? If so much of this software is going to be free and available for people to use and to fork and to view the code, where does that competitive advantage lie for you?
Do you mean competitive advantage, or do you mean like a moat of sorts?
Both, yeah. It could be like, just how do you think about the business kind of, how is the business going to differentiate itself from another?
So I would say that in the case of like us versus Umbrel, we pay a lot of attention to the core inner workings of the system, making sure that those work right. The team composition that we have is much more into like operating systems development, understanding how computers work at the kind of the deepest levels. And you'll also, and correspondingly, because we have so much focus in that, we don't have as great of I guess, refinement on like the paint, the user experience, the flow, how it feels for the average person to both learn how to use the product and to use it on a day-to-day basis. And I do owe Umbrel a hat tip of respect for doing as well as they have on that. But we have built the OS from scratch now twice, and so we know it very, very well. It's a very, very hard problem to try to solve if you haven't seen the solution already. And so the competitive that we have, the competitive advantage we really have is just that institutional knowledge at this point. And because of the license of the software, in theory, like, people won't just be able to copy it and run off and kind of catch up to us that way. And then the last piece of it is just that we hope that with transparency that we can essentially earn people's trust, and that as more of these services become decentralized, that doesn't mean that you're going to be self-hosting every single component of every single thing yourself. Sometimes you need partners to be able to facilitate your activity. Notably, here an example being like liquidity provision on the Lightning Network. And so if we're hoping that because we helped build all of the infrastructure, that we'll really have kind of front row seats to be service providers, which people can take or leave, right? And be service providers in an economy such that people can, outsource the small pieces that they feel comfortable outsourcing,
right?
For whatever convenience benefit that gives them.
Okay.
But ideally, the idea though is that it's a continuum. Is that kind of today everything is like you outsource everything to some Silicon Valley company, and they have complete control. And I think the right answer is that if you open up the spectrum, people can choose the right level of both risk and convenience that suits their needs and desires.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the Lightning Network has grown significantly in the last year. A lot of that came from April, May, June of 2021, but it's kind of continued the last 6 or 8 months. Can you speak to some of the growth you guys have seen? Like, is it comparable to the growth of the overall Lightning Network? Are people kind of running nodes? Is that trend continuing in the same way that capacity on the network is continuing? Is it outpacing it, underpacing it? Like, I'm trying to understand about how people are using Lightning and whether that growth is coming from all areas of the Lightning Network equally, Or is it, mostly custodial wallets that are seeing growth? Is it mostly capacity growth? Is it mostly node growth? What are your
I
thoughts on that?
think I think that the growth that the Lightning Network experienced in the summer of 21 was very, very tied to products like ourselves and like Umbrel, which is really great to hear. I think, however, I haven't kept up on the stats as recently because we've had our heads pretty far down in just trying to get this update out. But I think that the growth has slowed, and I think that that's in large part due to the fact that while getting onto the Lightning Network is as easy as it's ever been, there are still many challenges both on education and just on how well these products work about how to keep it well oiled and running on a day-to-day basis in a way that satisfies the actual needs that people have.
Right.
And I think there's much work to do there still, all the way down to the Lightning protocol, where things like the punishment scheme and whether or not there's toxic waste that's a result of running a node, all the way up to just like how do I get what does it mean for a channel to force close? Why are my funds in limbo, right? Like all these concepts that are necessary for the Lightning Network to function in a as trustless a way as possible, but that they haven't really been adequately explained to the end user or adequately abstracted in the products that they're using.
And I guess it also requires, for the Lightning Network to take off in the way that we may want it to, it requires some of those apps to jump on board and be available. If you're going to run a node, there's going to be a flourishing app store there ready for you to use, right?
Yep.
What are some of the challenges you've seen, maybe specifically talking about like the builders who are creating these apps? Like, what are their challenges in getting those apps launched? And is there any difference if I'm building a web app, a traditional web app, or a mobile app, or if I'm going to build an app that can be downloaded from an embassy? Are there any differences in the way that I'm building that?
Yes, and that is that most people, when they build web applications, they're in the assumption from the very beginning is that the web application will be hosted in a single place. That single application will have to manage many, many, many users, and that people will be logging in from wherever they are. The embassy model is totally, I don't want to say totally incompatible with that, but it kind of rejects that assumption from the get-go. It's not that you won't be building web applications, because the web is a fantastic piece of technology, and browsers are very, very rich experience pieces of software that would take forever to try to replicate. But the idea is that if I'm writing an app for the embassy, the expectation is that I'm managing probably one user, maybe like 10, right? In the maximum case, like for like a family or something like that. And so the design considerations there are remarkably different. You're now not trying to design things such that they can scale horizontally, but you're trying to like make sure that this thing is as lightweight as possible, that it deploys easily, and that the types of challenges that you have in writing peer-to-peer applications are very, very different than the ones where you have client-server applications. So the software itself is very different, but the good news is that a lot of people do that already, right? Like lots of people love writing peer-to-peer applications, and there's many people who have done it. The tragedy really is that these applications get written and then they just sort of sit on the shelf and barely anyone uses them. And then a lot of that's just because there's not really a strong deployment story for it. Because usually companies that are running their own servers probably have their own dev teams, or maybe they purchased a fat license from one of the big tech companies to do an on-premise deployment. And so while they're not, in those sorts of situations, they're not exposed to the censorship risk from these companies, they're still paying decent amount of money to do those deployments. And the consumer didn't have a means of deploying these self-hosted applications in a way that was going to work with their time and expertise. And so that's going to be part of it. It's just that there's going to be a lot of people who wrote these applications that even if they're not trying to monetize them, right, they'll just be like, it'd be nice if someone ran it, right? But we also expect that there will be people who want to monetize it. That's the far more tricky one, because if we can't figure out a way for those developers to get paid, then the dev side of the market it's not going to be as rich as it could be. And I don't mean like wealthy. I just mean like, it's not, the selection might not be as robust, or that the quality of the applications might not be as high, because you're essentially, you get what you pay for.
Mm-hmm. And there's that chicken
that's
and
an
egg
open question
too, right? There's that, you got to have users and you got to have developers. Yes. And how do you navigate that?
At the moment, by adding our own energy into the system. So as of right now, every application for the embassy, it wasn't developed by us, because like obviously we didn't author Bitcoin D or LND or any of those things, but we specifically maintain the packaging that goes around those applications that make it compatible with the embassy. And that works for a while, because that can help us get users just on our own efforts. Over time, though, like as we have user growth, we need to turn our focus, and we have done this to some extent already, but it's not really gotten its day to really be the focus for Start9. But building out the developer experience and making it as easy for developers to build and launch applications for the embassy as it is for the users to download and run them. Okay. And removing that friction for the developer is going to make it more likely that they want to get their application packaged onto the embassy.
Right. Okay, I got two more questions for you. First question is 5 years, 2025, year 2025, how many nodes will we have on the Lightning Network?
Oh, Christ.
I think, and let's use
nodes. Let me look up a number right now just to see where we're at today.
There's about 20,000 nodes with active channels today.
Okay.
According to 1ML. Let's use that as a metric.
I'm hoping, I think 200,000 is a reasonable estimate.
Okay.
That's like 10x growth from where we're at today. It's still kind of abysmally small. I like, obviously more would be better, but I think, being realistic about the challenges that we face, 200,000, I'm kind of making that up, but that feels right.
Interesting. I had Graham Krizik from Voltage on about a week or two ago, and I asked him the same question, and he said over 100,000. So you're in the right ballpark there. It seems like that's the kind of consensus estimate, is that low hundreds of thousands is probably the right number for a few years from now.
Yeah.
How big do you think node adoption gets? Like if we say the addressable market's 7 billion, 8 billion, whatever, how many people we have, where's that mature state? Is it in the hundreds of thousands, the millions, the billions?
I couldn't begin to answer that question in terms of like a sound prediction, but I'll tell you what I want, and I can tell you some of the challenges to get there.
Sure.
What I want is for everyone to be able to run their own 8 billion or whatever population growth we see. Now, granted, there's a lot of steps to get there. I think right now the population with internet access is still less than 4 billion, right? So internet infrastructure needs to get to people on the rest of the planet before this question is even coherent. In addition to that, a lot of problems have to be solved in terms of network bandwidth, right? Like if one of the unfortunate aspects of peer-to-peer technology is that just there's a lot more noise, there's a lot more chatter going back and forth on the wires, but we're also increasing network bandwidth every year still. So, I don't know what the physical limits that we'll hit are, but that's another major one. And then then UX, and that one's like hard to quantify. It's just like, the earliest people who purchase or run these things, they are the most tolerant to various UX quirks, because a lot of them have their own mental models of how these things work under the hood, and that those mental models are largely correct. As we start to increase adoption, we are afforded less and less of that ability. We have to communicate intuition without people having a shred of knowledge of how it works under the hood. How much we can do that and not destroy the value proposition that is people being sovereign, right? Because like obviously like there's a limit. It's like if you don't understand anything about how it works, there's only so you can only be so sovereign, and we can try to push that frontier as far as we can go. But like at the end of the day, the only truly sovereign people are the people who understand the whole thing top to bottom. But we can try to push that as far as it'll go. And people will be a hell of a lot more sovereign in a setup like this than they will be on any sort of Web 2 setup, period.
That's a good way of framing it. I like that. Okay, final question for you. Outside of the Embassy kind of suite of products, what is the most interesting Lightning application to you today?
Application.
Or any Lightning project, any protocol being built, anything.
I think technically speaking, DLCs can be considered a Lightning application, even though the spec hasn't been fleshed out completely for them. I am very like once you have money, like money is like the fundamental risk management tool that all humans really use, right? They're managing risk by having essentially a universal option on goods and services, which is what money is. And once you have that, now you want to start to be able to say like, okay, can I take more risk in certain ways? Can I take less risk in certain ways? And so like the various financial services built on top of it are going to be the most interesting applications to me as a result, because they allow you to trade risk across time and between people. So far, most financial contracts require some level of trust in order to execute or to facilitate. The real great innovation with Bitcoin is that because there isn't a central authority and through cryptography we can eliminate most points of trust, it means that we can ensure more access to people. I think right now DLCs are the only thing that I've seen that really fulfill that promise. Now, I will say this, is that I think there's still so much further to go. DLCs are essentially it's gambling, right? But if you gamble on the right things, like one person's speculation and gambling is another person's risk management. So if I am, if I'm inherently short aluminum because that's an input process to the products that I sell, then, buying aluminum futures or something like that might really help me. And DLCs, they can't literally give you futures on aluminum where aluminum will show up at your door, but you can bet essentially on the future price of aluminum to hedge out some of the risk of your business, and it'll be settled in Bitcoin. And so that takes you part of the way, and that's really cool. And not only does it take you part of the way on the risk management front, it does it in such a way that you are not actually like the trust properties are very minimal, and there's very good reason to believe that the premise or the axioms on which the security of a DLC rests are that those are sound.
So do you think DLCs kind of enable all the other financial applications that we see today in the real world and we see today built on other blockchains too? Do you think this includes like stable coins and derivatives and all this stuff?
I don't think so, but I do think that it's a very important stepping stone. And I don't necessarily mean that in the sense that we're going to build something on top of DLCs that completes the job. It's that DLCs very simply solve a subset of those problems. and that we might come up with much more complicated constructions to make all the trust properties and all of the things that you might want out of a financial contract work. But because of their inherent complexity, they might just take a long time to develop.
Makes sense.
That DLCs kind of they occupy this space that's very simple, not maximally powerful, but more powerful than what we have today, and as a result can take them much further than we are today.
Got it. This has been an incredible conversation. I've learned so much about topics that I didn't really know much about, to be honest.
Cool.
So this was a great
Glad to hear it.
masterclass, I feel like. Where can people go to find out more about you and Start9?
Yeah, so if you're interested in learning more about the embassy or purchasing one, start9.com. And then follow the Twitter account is at Start9 Labs. And for me, you can find me on Twitter as at Proof of Keegs.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you for taking the time out of your day today. And I'm really excited to see where you take Start9.
Cool. Thanks, Kevin.
Welcome to the Lightning Round presented by Voltage. Voltage is the premier provider of Bitcoin and Lightning node infrastructure. Many of the apps and services you already use in the Bitcoin and Lightning ecosystem already use Voltage to scale their business quickly and easily without any maintenance. Voltage also offers an inbound liquidity product called Flow that helps you as a node operator get inbound liquidity quickly and easily. Overall, Voltage is creating the industry standard of non-custodial products, helping brands and startups and entrepreneurs scale. To learn more about Voltage, visit voltage.cloud. All right, let's get into the lightning round. We had 6 different supporters send in sats in the last 2 days, which is pretty incredible. So thank you to everyone who sent in sats. Mary Oscar's on top of the leaderboard. He sent in over 9,000 sats. BTC Rich has sent in 3,366 sats. This is all over the last week. It's a little hard for me to find exactly how many sats everyone sent in over the last 2 days, but in the last week, 3,366 from BTC Rich. StemR42 has sent in 1,812. An anonymous user sent in 942 sats. Raven sent in 142 sats. That was in the last episode. Nick sent in 82 sats, and an anonymous user sent in 9 sats. Thank you to everyone for sending in sats. Let's get into the questions. First up, we had an anonymous user say, "Go Keagan," in response to episode 17 with Keagan Kusha at Stacker News. Second up, we had BTC Rich, who says, "More bullish than ever on Lightning. Keep up the great work, Kevin. Your show is the best with a focus on Lightning. Other than Lightning Junkies, are there any other Lightning content you would recommend?" Thank you for the question, BTC Rich. And actually, BTC Rich also put in his Lightning address, so he was the only one to do it. So BTC Rich, congratulations. There's 1,700 sats from last episode. But to answer your question, this podcast kind of developed because I was missing out on Lightning content. I didn't feel like there was enough content specific to Lightning and speaking about the actual growth of the network and the applications. That's one of the issues with Lightning, I think, is that, the privacy of Lightning is great for users, but it's really, really hard for people to get excited about because so many of the transactions happen in places that can't be seen. There's no dashboards for tracking the volume of Lightning Network payments around the world in the same way that there are for blockchain-based payments on Bitcoin and on other blockchains. So I think there's just a lot of content that is yet to be discovered, and there's a lot of people building interesting applications, getting actual traction, and it just felt like people didn't know about it. So I hope that this podcast can kind of serve that purpose and bring light to all the innovation that's happening in Lightning. I think a lot of the big Bitcoin podcasts do a good job of covering certain Lightning topics. Every now and then you'll have Lightning guests on those shows, and I think they do a great job. I expect we'll see more Lightning content in the future, but really this show was kind of started because I felt like I was missing out, and there was more Lightning information out there that was not being shared.
So hopefully this is helpful for everyone listening. Finally, Nick sends in a message. He says, "Hope this gets you to 100,000 sats." Sent in a little boost of 82, and Nick, it's a good prediction. You got the total income of the show has now passed 100,000 sats. Nick may have had some inside information on that one, but thank you everyone who has sent in tips, comments, and questions so far. It's pretty crazy to see that you can actually earn an income on this stuff. Like 100,000 sats may not be an enormous amount in dollar terms, but I think as the show grows, as people become more accustomed to using Lightning, and as the price of Bitcoin grows, we'll start to see that people can really make an income from this value for value podcasting model built on Lightning. So really cool to see. Can't wait to see all the questions and comments you guys send in next week. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I'll be giving away 1,800 sats to a listener that sends in a comment or a question over the Lightning Network. Again, include your Lightning address or your Twitter handle or some way for me to reach out to you, because I cannot pay directly within Fountain today. Hope to see all those questions in the next few days, and see you soon.